A bit of luck, some slides will come up in a minute. Defeated. There we go. Right, good morning. As finance director, I often get proposals for improvements to all kinds of things, be it fabric of stations, safety improvements, environmental improvements. And some cases are easy to understand and are clearly economic. If we want to invest some money in a railway arch because we can get it rented out to tenants, that's a nice, easy, straightforward business case. And some are a little less clear and a little harder to understand. And I want to try and bring some thoughts that we've had at Network Rail into how we can make energy efficiency business cases easier to understand. But first, there we go. What I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about who is Network Rail. This is was an interesting talk to give, particularly after a day like yesterday. And if anybody was commuting back to Kent or Sussex, I'm sorry, you would have been late and you would have been damn hot. In fact, the last time I spoke to a sort of open public forum like this, we were having a fantastic day. And all our trains were arriving on time. But we have what some commentators describe as a Goldilocks railway. It works fantastically from about -5 to +24. So I'm going to stay in the little zone here. It works from about -5 to +24, gets above +24, and the overhead line starts sagging. And if anybody's planning on going east out of Liverpool Street, I would suggest you go for lunch and have a long, quiet drink until we get the wires back up, because they've sagged so far that they got snagged on somebody's pantograph and have come down. So I firstly apologise, and hopefully today will be better. But just to talk about Network Rail and just put some of what we do on energy into context, we have an enormous and very dispersed asset base. We spend an enormous amount of capex. You can see some of the numbers in the bottom left-hand corner there. More than all 22 water companies combined. We spend something like £10 million a day of capex. So actually for us, when we look at energy efficiency, finding the money is not the biggest problem, because we have a great big pipeline, which the government has agreed it's a good idea for us to keep replacing assets, because we saw what happened when the railway stopped replacing assets. So we have a big renewals program. And for us, the energy efficiency challenge is in the same way as with safety, where what we try and do is make things safe by design, because it is much easier to make something safe if you design it safe from the beginning rather than try and retrofit it. Similarly, with energy efficiency, it's much easier to make things energy efficient if you do it when you put it in. And some of our big stations, we might not dig up more than once every 80 or 100 years. So while 3M, and I applaud the focus of having a one-year payback, we tend to look at things on a much longer horizon. I'm going to talk a little bit about electrifying the Great West Main Line. That has a payback of around 23, 24 years. Our assets last typically for 40 years. If you look at some of our bridges, they were put in by the Victorians. We might have painted them and taken a few plants out, but otherwise it's the same bridge. So we don't know what our renewal life cycle for bridges is. So we have a very long perspective on things, and that's why for us, building our energy efficiency into our base processes is really important, because you don't get a chance to chop and change. It's not like a little factory that 3M might whack up and it's there for 20 years and then they're going to completely retool it and they can look at it then. So a dispersed asset base and also some big challenges. We're a high hazard sector, so safety is obviously a significant issue for us. Network Rail, the company, formed in 2002. It's not for dividend, which is slightly different than not for profit. We do make profits. We announced profits a couple of weeks ago of a couple of £1 billion, but we reinvest all our profits back in improving the rail infrastructure. We only cover UK rail infrastructure, and there's some debate as to whether the Isle of Wight is part of our asset base or not, but it's quite small, so we don't have to worry too much about it. And notwithstanding the views of people like Sir Roy McNulty and many benchmarking studies that have been done, we are less efficient than Europe. Whether it's 40%, 20%, or some other number remains to be seen. But we've made significant cost reductions since coming into being. We have also driven up performance. Again, it didn't feel like it yesterday, but the railway is much more reliable now than it was 8 or 9 years ago. Those of you that were using it back then will remember that the dark days post-Hatfield, where there were speed restrictions all over the country, and about 1 in 4 trains was arriving late, whereas now it's down to just under 1 in 10 on an average day. The other thing we've done, which you can see from that chart there, is we run far more trains. The railway is a success. More and more people want to use it. We grew at 7% last year in terms of passenger numbers. And if the economy was growing at the same rate, we would have more services and lower taxes. But sadly, that's not quite the case. And you can see we run more trains in France. And that for example, brings a particular challenge for us. France is really big, and they run fewer trains. The UK is much smaller. We run far more trains, which means that if you have disruption, then clearly, like on a highway, if you have an accident at 2 in the morning, nobody notices and the traffic continues flowing, whereas if you have an accident in rush hour, it backs up for miles and takes hours to clear, and the same is true on the railway. That also means for us, we have limited time to get in and do our work. So we have very short windows to go in and maintain the infrastructure. So we have targets. Everybody has targets. We have targets. We have a 5-year regulatory settlement. And what you can see there is we get our funding secured at the beginning, some £30 billion. Unfortunately, we got £30 billion in return for £35 billion worth of work. So we need to take roughly 21% out of our cost base, which equates to about 800 or 900 million a year over the 5-year period. We need to reduce safety risk, improve reliability. Capability is about how fast the trains go and what size trains you can push down the track. Capacity, massive increases in capacity. By the time we've finished the Thameslink program, which goes north to south, and then the Crossrail program, it's an increase of about some 20% in London capacity, or in other terms, in the peak hour, it's an extra 100,000 people coming into London. I'm sure some of you hope that some of that capacity is used for you to sit rather than for additional people to travel. Unfortunately, we can't control that. We just provide the capacity. And you can see some other targets there. What you can see is missing is we don't have explicit regulatory targets for energy uses, for environmental stuff. But below this, we have a suite of other targets that we look at, but we're not regulated on environmental performance, which I think will change when we come into the next control period. The next control period starts April 2014, and there will be increasing pressure on us to come up with, I'm not going to talk about this because it's a bit dull, to come up with some targets. Right, so talking about investing in environmental, and the analogy I draw with a lot of this is the same analogy, is with safety. Because in the railway, safety is everything. And safety is really, really important. But if people come along and say, you need to spend this money because it's safety, they think that if there's a little box marked safety, then it automatically gets the money. Now, clearly, if something is visibly and obviously an unacceptable safety risk, we're going to spend the money. But in and of itself, that's not enough. You need to make safety part of the investment process. Similarly, with energy efficiency, it's not good enough just to say, if everyone switched off the lights, we would save the planet. That's probably true. But most people in their day-to-day lives are too short-term. They don't think about what's going to happen tomorrow. They're just trying to make it through today, get home to their family, deal with the child that was screaming last night, and carry on with their lives. So to me, we need to find ways of making the investment process and the extent to which energy efficiency is included in the investment process the easy thing to do. And it doesn't start with an ideological debate, I don't believe. It starts with a much more hard-nosed debate. I'll give you another example. It's not about targets. We have a corporate responsibility group. We produce a report every year. Our report has won awards for being the world's best corporate sustainability report. And it's fantastic. You go online, it's now interactive, and you can draw little pictures and move things around. And we've got targets littered through our report. When I got to the company a couple of years ago, sat down, had a look at the report. I said, this is fantastic. We must be doing great things. And we include some of our environmental targets in there. And what I discovered was when I then went to management meetings, where I sat down with business units and we discussed their performance, we talked about railway performance, asset performance, financial performance, safety performance, but none of the corporate responsibility targets were in the business plan. They were in this little parallel world inhabited by very enthusiastic, very well-meaning people who are absolutely committed to making a difference, but we're trying to do it in a parallel process because they couldn't get on the main agenda. And that, to me, that's what people like finance directors and chief operating officers, that's what we need to change. Because unless you make that part of the core business, it won't get the airtime and people won't pay attention. And similarly, with investment cases. So we make investment decisions on a wide range of factors. Most of our business is actually about asset management. We have, as I put up earlier, a huge asset base which requires investment. And so as we look at each of the proposals that comes through, and we get probably 2,000 to 3,000 capital expenditure applications a year, which comes through at any point in time. We've got 6,000 capital projects running. We have some enormous things like Blackfriars Bridge or King's Cross Station, but the average lot size for our capital expenditure is £50,000. So we have a great big machine, which I'll talk about in a bit, that processes capital expenditure approvals. And so we have a structured system that looks at the different dimensions of each individual application for capital expenditure, which needs to make sense in the terms described here. And if you're coming forward with an energy efficiency case, and there's someone in the audience who I've spent a lot of time working with to develop some of these, it needs to work from all of those perspectives. It needs to make technical sense. So, for example, we looked at solar panels. You'd have a fairly obvious thing. Railway, you've got lots of land, you've got lots of roofs, put up some solar panels. So someone does some little numbers and says you've got 14,000 acres of roof space multiplied by X times the fit equals £2.5 billion worth of income. You can run a railway for free. Well, I don't know if you've ever looked at Victoria train roof, but one, it's listed, two, it's curved. If you look at some of our train depots, you drive past them as you go on the train. They were whacked up in a real hurry in the 60s, and they wouldn't support a pigeon, much less half an acre of solar panels. So it needs to make technical sense, it needs to make operational sense. What are you going to do with the power once you started to generate it? Are you going to sell it back to the grid? Are you going to feed it back into the individual unit or depot or wherever you've put it up? It needs to make commercial sense. We spent a lot of time trying to work out what the most appropriate procurement arrangement is, and I'll talk a little more about those. And it needs to focus on the company objectives. If you're making an investment case and you're part of a reasonable sized company, somewhere, someone in the strategy department has written down what the company objectives are. They probably don't mean anything to you, you probably haven't seen them, but they'll be written down somewhere. Go and find them and structure your business case so that it lines up against those objectives, because that's the way I think it's best to try and get that. So now we talk about money, which is my favorite topic, obviously. So we have an easy return requirement, 4.75%. It's real, so it's inflation adjusted. And if the return exceeds the core business IRR, surely it's a no-brainer. Well, that's not always true, because sometimes you can get over that hurdle, but you've got capital constraints. We're in a very fortunate position where we borrow with the benefit of a government indemnity. So capital constraints are, for this kind of project, not our biggest problem. Our biggest problem is making sure that each incremental investment we make is additive to our overall mix of returns that we're getting from our assets. And even if it doesn't make pure financial sense, it very often can make the operation easier. So one of the things we've invested a lot of money in, and still in the middle of a program, is just trying to find out how many meters we've got. We think we've got about 10,000. We're not absolutely sure what things are connected to which meters. And so we've put money into a program of going out, discovering them. And some of them are, we've got another presentation with some pictures, some of them are stuck behind fences. because the guys were told put a fence in. So they put a fence in, they didn't bother to think the meter was behind the fence, and so someone might have cut a little hole in the fence so they can get into the meter. So just trying to find out where the meters are, trying to find out what they're connected to, trying to make sure that the utility company knows that if you are going to do some piece of planned maintenance and you're going to shut down the power, it'd be a really good idea if you told us, because then our customers will get to carry on using the train, because that might be powering a signaling system, which if you shut the power off, the signaling system goes down, and people don't get to use the train. And we have a number of outages every year just because of that. And sometimes they, notwithstanding that, they still don't tell us, and they cut the power off, and we deal with them. So it may not make cash sense in a direct way, so putting some of those meters in and doing the meter reading doesn't necessarily make sense, but if as part of an overall pool, because we've got lots of meters where other people are drawing off our power without paying, so we've probably made a couple of £1 million of annual return by finding that people were using our electricity and charging for it. You use that to then subsidize something that makes the business run better, because now we have a higher degree of confidence that we know what assets are powered by what electricity. We've put environment, and I include energy efficiency in that, at the heart of our investment process. I'm not going to try and explain this. You need to attend the Network Rail investment business case preparation course, which is a 5-day course before you can fill one of these charts in. But we have a hierarchy which starts at the bottom of the triangle, and investment cases go up through the corporation in order of size. One of the problems we have is a lot of energy efficiency investments are quite small. £1 million here, a couple of £1 million there. That's not going to get all the way through to the top of the office unless we force it to. And so when you're down with somebody who's managing a smaller portfolio, suddenly that's a lot of money. Must I fix the track? Must I spend some money on this energy efficiency? That's a much more difficult choice for a middle manager to make. So what we try to do is, by putting in that box in the middle and to the right where we risk score all of our investments, if there's a big environmental opportunity, it will then float further up that triangle, and therefore will get seen by more senior management who are, it's perhaps easier for us to make broader, more balanced judgments. So what are we doing? That's all noise and talk. And I have to say, I heard something about McKinsey curves before tea, which confused the hell out of me. I'm not a curve person. I believe that if you want to do something, just get on and do it. Find a way, find a will, and make it happen. So Blackfriars Station is the first station to span the river. There will be a southern entrance as well as a northern entrance. We will open the station, God and our contractor willing, in December 11. And the station will be across the bridge, and across the roof of the station we will have PV cells generating electricity, which will be fed straight back into the station, as well as having a feed into the national grid. King's Cross, and this is a great one of where we got it wrong, in my view. We have the nice long big, does somebody know King's Cross Station? This is one of my favourite projects, so forgive me for a minute. If you look at the station at the moment, out the front, it doesn't look like that right now. You've got the station concourse and that horrible awning, and sort of out on the street with smokers and bus stops and all kinds of unpleasant things. By the time we finished, we put the concourse on the side, which is that semicircular building, knock away all that stuff, be right back to the original Victorian brick, and the square in front of it will be the size of Leicester Square. I personally want to knock down the Camden Library and make a little park so everyone can sit there and look at my station. But unfortunately, no one gave me £1 billion to do that, so you'll just have to look at it from the road. But we're going to have PV cells all the way down the train shed, so the long thin bit, but we didn't put them on the concourse roof. And that was a classic example of tension, because the security people say you need to be able to explode a nuclear bomb in the middle of King's Cross Station and nobody dies and no glass blows off the roof. So you wind up putting very, very expensive security glass, and at the point that we had to make those decisions, the technology to combine the PV cells inside that glass just wasn't there. I'm not sure if it is now, but it wasn't at the time. And so that, to me, is an opportunity missed, but nonetheless. We're building a new operational headquarters up in Milton Keynes to house some 2,800 people. And we've taken some quite brave decisions, I think. Living roofs, natural ventilation. There will be no air conditioning in the building. You can imagine the kind of conversations we've had around the company about lack of air conditioning. We tend to have those conversations in the winter rather than on a day like yesterday. Water efficiency, waste management. For us, that is an exemplar. That's a place we want people to come and say, this is how you can build office buildings. Easy to do in Milton Keynes because you don't have the same pressure that Calvia was talking about everybody else is still using air conditioning, so the heat generated by the buildings makes it hard for you to do something like that. And clearly we don't have to go for the same sort of massing that you do in London. Here's another big one, electrification of the Great West Main Line. We spend £300 million a year on electricity. We are the country's largest single user of electricity ever since Chorus shut down one of their foundries. But there is a clear and obvious business case to electrify diesel lines. The trains are cheaper to run, they have better acceleration, better performance, and they emit less carbon. Although a lot of our carbon efficiency will be driven by what happens to the grid, rather than by what we do. There's lots we can do with drivers. We're now putting meters on trains, giving real-time feedback to drivers, saying you don't need to accelerate now, you can just coast. And there's probably a 7 to 10% efficiency simply in changing driver behavior. But that is a huge project, £600–700 million, and as I say, a payback of some 20 to 30 years. External financing, another great scheme. People come along and say, I've got this fantastic scheme, and it won't cost you anything, because I've got this nice person who's going to lend me something from their infrastructure fund that's buying up wind farms, and they're doing this, and we can package it all up, and oh gosh, there's just a lease payment, but you won't have to pay that because we'll make the savings on energy efficiency. Those sort of work. They can work, they can make sense, but to me, if you're a business, and if energy is a material part of your business as it is for us, and different people are in different types of businesses, and people are faced with capital constraints, so you need to do what's right for your business. But if energy is a meaningful part of your business, then you should be funding this with your own money, because the returns you can make from investing in energy efficiency are enough to satisfy it. But we don't know everything. And I can say that with absolute confidence. There's lots of things we don't know. And therefore, by partnering with outside people, you can get access to different ranges of skills. And lots of people here today that know an awful lot more about this kind of topic than we do, that can help us to put together cases. And sometimes that includes some external financing. And that, I think, is a good way. If somebody comes up and says, I'm going to save you all this money, you say, fantastic, stick some of your money in, and let's see how brave we're all feeling. Because that, to me, demonstrates real commitment. Right, so unlike the trains, I think I finished on time. And I think we've got a few minutes for questions, and then we have the panel, or...
Yeah, definitely have some questions.
Just one thing while we're just getting cracking is, I read the 3M stuff, and if you haven't read it, read it, because that's the kind of thing I think is how you make a difference. You get somebody that makes a decision and then sticks to it, and we have a saying inside our company which is called copy with pride. So if you see somebody doing something better than you, copy it and be proud about the fact that you copied it. And we will definitely be implementing some of the 3M stuff, because to me that's just straightforward. That is a way you can make a real difference, is by having a sustained commitment to a long-term program.
Very good. Well, would you like to... Yeah, let's give you a round of applause. I thought that was really good, and I think what's I took away from that was you had a finance director who was really talking about how you structure a program. So you're starting with how you get it into the management agenda, then you're looking at the company's objectives against what you're trying to do, and I think it's very important to marry those two up in your business case presentation, having clear hurdle rates, so an IRR rate of 4.75, which you know you need to beat, and then having an internal matrix which allows senior management to really see what's going on through to all levels of the business. So I think it was very good indeed. Have we got any? We could probably got time for a couple of questions before we go into a panel session. People might want to know why their train was late. No. Over here.
Phil Dominy, Ernst & Young. You said that at the moment you're not regulated on environmental performance, but from 2014 that's likely to change. How do you think that's going to impact your business? 'Cause clearly you're already, striving in that respect. Will it create a step change, or will it just accelerate what you're doing, or will it have a more fundamental behavioural impact?
As a good accountant, you would expect me to say it depends. And to some extent, it depends on how clearly we can articulate what the right domain of targets is. If we can be coherent in, because the regulator can't make up targets. The regulator can only really make up targets around things that we've said we'll do, and that are easy to measure and that you can regulate in that way. So I'd like to see us putting forward. We're going to have a carbon target, as everybody is, so that'll be fed into our core regulatory regime. And I think we will almost certainly wind up with some kind of environmental fund which will be targeted at driving energy efficiency. So there'll be targets around the purpose to which that fund gets applied, the projects that are supported by it, and the outputs that are expected in energy efficiency, or broader environmental. I mean, clearly for us, we're talking about energy efficiency here, but we do quite a lot of building, and so we generate an enormous amount of spoil, and how can we recycle rail and ballast and sleepers and concrete from stations, and so that I think will be another big area of target. And then the whole sort of utilities recycling. Are you using heat to generate power? Will be part of it. We have, for example, we have a fleet, a network, probably a network of mobile generators, which generally break when we really need them because we didn't use them for 2 years. So we're looking at the possibilities of creating a virtual grid from a combination of those and some solar and wind power, and seeing how best we can use that. I think the other thing will just be investment in our core electricity assets. We have 2 grids. We have an AC grid and a DC grid. It's the largest DC grid in the world, and we're investing in some control systems. But I think there'll be a step change in investments to manage and manipulate the way that we use electricity across the railway.